Hey everyone, thank you for coming. Yes, I am Katie Kowalsky. I am many things, a host of PCD, a Twitterer for NACIS, and I work at Here Technologies every 40-hour work week. So today I'm going to be talking about my transition at Here and what I'm working on currently, because I think last NACIS you probably knew me as a map zenner. And so the considerations that I've been taking into account while I'm developing a new product for Here called XYZ. Obviously, I can't resist a very nerdy pun, so I had to go with here and back again. So yeah, I think my inner nerdery is, if it wasn't explicit before, it's gonna be overly explicit by the time this talk is done. So hopefully all the Tolkien fans are in the front row. So yes, I'm Katie. I'm based in San Francisco. I'm a MapZen alumni, and now I work at Here. But no matter where I work, my goal is always the same, and that I develop tools to make mapping better and easier for everyone. I started out as a cartographer. I was doing everything from print maps to web maps, and I realized that as good as I am a cartographer, I realize I have a skill in being able to communicate what it takes for cartographers to do things to engineers, to designers, and there's, as much as there are so many great people in mapping tech doing that already, there can always be more, especially from this audience of NACIS. So I've kind of tried to focus my work on how to make things easier for everyone in this room or the other room, or even at other conferences who I won't name. I love you most, NACIS, don't worry. So I'm making a map, or talk about Middle Earth, mapping, what? So I decided to start thinking about why I moved into mapping tech and all the different things that come together to describe cartography. And you can't reference Tolkien without mentioning a Tolkien map. So I took over the map of Middle Earth and made mapping Middle Earth. And I thought this was a really interesting exercise because it allowed me to think through all the different aspects of mapping tech, and it's a huge amount of things that we have to know. I even just started adding in the different file formats we all work in, and that is a erroneous task that will make this talk less good in quality, but this map surely entertaining. And don't worry, I added halos. So I'm gonna walk on over, if that's fine, because this is cordless. Do a little Vanna White. What I think is interesting is where I learned a lot of my skills is up in the Shire. Ooh, the Shire, a metaphor for a place that's nice and comfortable. Well, I thought that through. So the world of traditional print mapping often relies on GIS software and Illustrator and Photoshop, with a lot of fun things sprinkled between, like shape files or learning shaded relief. And while that is really nice and comfortable, and a lot of what I did extended into that for a long time, when I started at MapZen, I started focusing more on other random things throughout Middle Earth. Let's take a journey. Obviously, a lot of mapping tech is now in this area of mapping APIs and data viz tools and even routing, dare I say. And a lot of what I started to work on got me more comfortable working in Leaflet or other APIs every day. I even know how to do some routing, which is not good. No one needs me to make my own routing engine. It will just be how to get from one area of Middle Earth to another. And the other sort of thing I started to work on at MapZen alongside the Tangram team and TileZen team run by Nathaniel Kelso, are map renders and WebGL and shaders. So again, I was starting to go all around this map. I even started to learn enough PostGIS to hurt myself, but there was an area I was kind of avoiding in mapping tech for a very long time. Mordor. We never really talk about managing data. A lot of the times at other conferences, we'll talk about, I'll see at other conferences, people setting up elaborate PostGIS databases, or, hey, I just hooked this up to AWS, this was so easy. And as much as there are people who can do that, and there are people who can design maps, I'm a middle ground of that person. I can do enough tiling to hurt myself, but mostly I leave with a lot of bruises. And I wanted to make things a lot easier. So the crux of the product that I've been working on with here is how to make this easier. Whether you're a cartographer, a software developer, my mom in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, shout out. She's not listening, don't worry. She would be mortified to know that I made a whole talk about Lord of the Rings. So to continue this elaborate metaphor is I decided to be the Frodo I wanted to see in the world. You can also be anyone in the fellowship. But I think a lot of times when you're looking in challenges, you have to take, or different aspects of mapping tech, you have to take the challenges that are really exciting. And the amazing part of what we're working on with vector tiles and huge amounts of data that we have access to and GL technology is that we're not talking about how to store it at all. And I see so many amazing visualizations that I want to make, and I follow a tutorial and I get lost as soon as they start saying, oh yeah, just do this all in GDAL, baby. I don't know how to do that. And so I wanted to help work on a product at XYZ, with XYZ for everyone, whether you're 100% technical every day or you work completely in the cartographic space. So if there's anything I've learned through my obsession with Tolkien is that it's the importance of stories, not just in our personal lives, but it's how we do work as cartographers in developing products and being humans in general. Listening to people's stories is really important, I think, as we all know in the last year in the world, that's very important, but it's so important in product design and development. I'm not the first person to share this in the world, but it's something that I think needs to be shared every single day. Because a lot of fancy books and TED Talks might say that making products is a really mystical art up there with witchcraft. It's not. It's really just doing this sentence over and over and over until you're very tired and need a snack. And it's very simple to walk through. And if you don't do product development every day, you can just shift it over to mean a map, because I think maps are individual products, right? They're something we work on for a crazy amount of time that still require all of this. So just to walk through this, all it is in order to do blank, our map or product will solve blank this problem by giving them blank. And so once you work on that statement and start iterating it, it starts to make a lot of the features that you need to do come to light really obviously. And I think the best thing I've ever learned, whether in cartography or doing product development now, is that I need to write this down, have it on my computer screen, have it on my desk, probably just get it tattooed, because that's trendy San Francisco thing to do. And it helps you keep your main goals and priorities adjusted. And with all the cool things happening in mapping, it's really easy to say, oh, let's just add a 3D visualization on this when we haven't even figured out basic styling formatting. So while I was working through this, I distilled our product down into this, which I should probably explain at this point, as I have mentioned this product called XYZ, and as we all know, that means coordinates, but what is that in terms of a product? XYZ is a series of tools that we have at here that manage spatial data by generating it into tiles. It scales with the amount of data you upload and is live updating. And so that sounds really nice. We all have data that's constantly growing, constantly updating, and having something that automatically tiles for you is great. There's a lot of really good tools that you can make tile for you, but it requires a little bit of technical savvy sometimes. And so once you've distilled this product statement, it's great, but what are those series of tools? So to find that out, what I do a lot is writing user stories. Again, I'm not the first person to talk about user stories at this conference, and I hope I won't be the last, because I think we need constant reminders as people working in mapping, whether it's a cartographer or on the technology side, that user stories are so, so important. And they're very fun, and you often end up talking to yourself, as my coworkers can attest to. But it's a really easy step. And so the first thing I do is add a name and a position. And I think that's really, that sounds silly and maybe trivial, but I take a lot of care in this first step, because first is a name. We want to make sure that the diversity of the names we're choosing matches the landscape we're in. No one's going to just be called Bob, right? I want to talk about Stephanie. I want to talk about Michael. I want to talk about Danish. What are their, just by choosing a name, they're choosing a lot about a person, right? And then their position. This person in the story is a cartographic engineer. That's a really interesting combination of words. Not only is this person working in mapping, but there's also an amount of technical savvy required. There's so many different job titles in tech, and especially in mapping tech, that while they all sound kind of similar, they all mean a little bit of different things. And eventually, when you start emailing this with your design departments, your engineering teams, or marketing, sometimes all the nice little stuff you spent lots of time working on gets distilled into that first line. So what does cartographic engineer mean to that person? And the next step is what do they want to do? This kind of fits back into that previous statement of what is the target audience's goal. And this is the only time I ever write in paragraph form. It's the nature of being too much on Twitter, I guess. And this is only 2 sentences, so my English teachers are not proud of me. But this is a really simple statement. This person wants to work with a large data set of all trees in San Francisco and make a visualization. Sounds like some people in this room. And they want the ability to style icons based off of various attributes, such as age, size, type. Okay, so now we're getting to the crux of they have this data, and what do they want to do with it? Pretty easy. And then the last sentence is also really useful for this because being able to try out multiple open source options or publish their map over social media, that starts to talk about how does this get out of this ecosystem and into the world. Step number 3 is taking what tools people are already familiar with. We live in an age where people are using web apps, mobile apps constantly, and there's no separation of UX development within Spotify or Facebook or even with mapping tech. And I think we have to think through what are the things people are familiar with and what can that lend into our own work. So for instance, this person is familiar with GDAL. So that means that we can talk about command line interfaces and we can offer that as an opportunity. Or they're used to a text editor, which means that we may not be afraid to go into a code view. And the last step is my favorite step because it's the best way to go back to number 2 and make sure they're doing the steps they want to do. This gets more granular into actually building out functionality of a product, and this is where you get to really annoy your coworkers because the way I practice step number 4 is I literally give myself a task like open an email in Gmail, and I walk through, okay, I'm logging in now, I'm opening this, I'm pressing this button, and once you start pressing all the buttons and narrating it and maybe recording yourself and sounding like a crazy person, you can start realizing all the steps it should take to get to a functionality of product versus how much it might. And I think a lot of people want shorter experiences that are more meaningful. And so having to hide things behind a lot of windows doesn't necessarily work for people and products anymore. And so I iterate through this at least 5 to 7 times. And I think that's the lovely nature of mapping tech is that there's so many different people coming to this audience and coming into this technology space that allows you to iterate a lot through this. And just like Tolkien, this challenge can sometimes realize that you need a trilogy, except when you're a movie franchise around The Hobbit, but we're gonna get to that in my questions. And so one of the things that we realized while we were designing XYZ is that there's so many wonderful use cases of mapping. There's people in this room who are inclined to go into certain parts of that Middle Earth map versus others. And they're all valid. I think too often technology is wanting to undercut one area or another, but with XYZ, we're trying to make all of this as cohesive as possible. Because some days I feel like using a command line interface, but other days I want to use a visual interface, and there's nothing wrong with that choice. Giving people a choice is the correct thing to do, I think. And so with XYZ, we have 3 main offerings. We have a visual interface called Studio, which is a very simple editor for being able to upload, edit, and do some basic visualizations. It is by far very lacking in the amazing features that other products called Studio have on the internet. But it's a nice thing to use for when you want to start managing data and maybe don't want to go into an API right away. That's very understandable. Then we have a command line interface. And I hate to admit this, but I've started to really like command line because of this. It's really useful for being able to upload data and just start doing quick statistics. It really pairs nicely with GDAL if you're familiar with that. And then lastly, we have our full service API. And this is the undercurrent of the CLI and the Studio. And it's really great for when you have a large scale database that's going to be constantly updating. You can hook that all up through an API. Or if you're making visualizations, this is what you'll use. I think a lot about the fact that cartography is the most simple word that we can use to describe who we are. Working in the tech world, I've realized that all of these skills that we describe as cartography are all individual jobs in the world. And we could all just do one of these and get paid a lot of money for that too. And we're crazy for doing all of it at once. We should all ask for raises after this. Let's all leave right now and go do that. And so building a product that can handle this many skills and users is really hard. And that's not to mean it's not a challenge worth undertaking. It just means that everyone in this room at NACIS, in the whole geo world as a whole, lean to different parts. And again, that's not wrong. That's great. That's what makes this community, that's what makes these data visualizations or maps, whatever you want to call them, so interesting. Because people naturally lend themselves into different areas. And because our products and our skills vary, we need products that vary alongside with us. As I mentioned, we kind of split up this product into 3 different offerings. But on top of that, we wanted to make sure people are still being able to use the tools that they like. I love using a lot of different tools in mapping. I refuse to work at a mapping company that only lets me use one system because I love so many different systems. And I talk to so many different cartographers that will say, oh yeah, I'm working at a blank, like I can only work with this at work. I would love to know other tools, but I don't have time. And I don't want to build another product that's going to force people into a system. And so I think interoperability and flexibility are so essential. And not just in whether you go from an API to a command line interface to a GUI, but whether you can tap into existing communities of people that love Leaflet, people that love OSM, people that love multiple different types of renderers. And so one of the first things that we did when we were making this product real was that we reached out to our very good friends at Stamen and helped them communicate this message to the world. We have 4 tutorials up already that go through all of your favorite renderers, from Leaflet to Tangram to even fancy WebGL 3.js, using this kind of data storage system for mapping. There's a lot of great visualization tools out there, and we want to meet people where they are, because all this really is a simple way of storing spatial data. That being said, XYZ is new, it's free most of all, and it's focused on meeting where you are. I'm the product manager of this product, and I care so much about what this community creates and how they are able to create that easier. So please reach out to me if you're using it. I would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you, NACIS. For more, go to explore.xyz.here.com or just talk to me, and I have some fun stickers. Thank you.
We have time for questions. Any questions? Yes.
That was an awesome talk. I really resonated with the piece around user stories, and I was curious, in your product management cycle, like I've often written user stories at the beginning and found them a really helpful tool, and then like 4 months later, you're into like, this feature is going to be hard to code, and this other person wants this other thing. Like, how do you return back to them through the cycle? And are there like tools or tips or tricks around like actually making sure that, or is it useful to stick with them through the cycle, or do they, yeah, how does that?
In any type of development or design, I think iteration is key. That user story sample was actually the first thing I ever wrote to paper. And luckily that person named Stephanie, who is a cartographic engineer, is not at NACIS right now, so that's very good. I did not change that name, sorry. But yeah, I think I've expanded upon that a lot, and especially as we increase features or functionality in our own tools. I make a lot of sub-bullet lists in the step 4 especially, because there are so many different things that happen once you decide, okay, you want to add icons to a map. Now here's all the different things. And the nature of products that exist in a GUI especially, they're never really done, and you can always go back and iterate on them. And so immediately baking that into some of your user stories, because I think some personalities or some types are more inclined to do that than others, I think is really important. And then also, I just have a standing meeting with a couple of our designers and lead technical engineers on XYZ about once a month, where we can talk about a lot of things, but I try to get us to go back to user stories and make sure we're still meeting the core functionality. Because realistically, I work at a really big mapping company that does a lot of cool stuff. And so when you're introducing a new product, a lot of people want to add in their cool things. And my job is to say yes or no. And I'm from the Midwest, so saying no is very hard. But these user stories give me an excuse to say no.
I'll take one more.
So that list of skills that you put up there is pretty powerful. And if you looked at what a cartographer did probably 5 years ago, I would say it would be about half of those. How is that affecting us all mentally?
It's really bad. I think a lot about unpaid or emotional labor constantly, because I'm a woman in tech. But also I think as cartographers, we have a lot of unpaid labor because we know a lot about a lot of things. And especially working in the teching space, the tech mapping space, is that a lot of times we know a lot about these things. And again, we're not gonna be 100% expert level in everything, but I think there's a dangerous thing that happens when you become a person with a lot of hats, which is a good thing. And don't get me wrong, the thing I describe myself at parties at is always a cartographer, because I think that is the strongest skill all of us have, to be able to do so many things. But at the same time, that's a double-edged sword. And I think that especially with the way that a lot of the industry is going, or the demands or the rise of data visualization instead of mapping, means that we're doing a lot more for not more as well. You know, I hear a lot of cartographers that are dealing with the same struggles that all of us deal with in this economy or in this kind of world, where people are just going to keep taking, but I don't see necessarily a growth of more, and I think that's dangerous. I don't know how to approach that, and maybe we should have a radical socialist cartographic agenda later, but you know, it's something to consider. I mean, I like being able to do this many things, but that's not fair, and I think that's a constant struggle in this industry especially.
All right, thank you, Katie.